Our next speaker is Sam Gilvarg. Sam is a graduate student at SUNY ESF up in Syracuse. He's been working the past couple of summers collecting ticks and burn areas. You know, this is a great talk, so going into a break right after this, you're probably going to feel a little bit scratchy and itchy from talking about ticks. But just remember, you haven't walked into the woods. So, Sam? Press your right forward, backwards. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at this event. I greatly appreciate it. And if I start talking too fast, just let me know. I get excited and I start talking fast. So just collectively give me a signal and I'll stop talking fast. Today I'm going to be discussing some research that I'm doing in conjunction with my committee at SUNY ESF and folks at Brookhaven National Laboratory, including Tim. And the research is looking at how wildfire affects population dynamics of medicinally important tick species, specifically in pine barren systems. And before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the support I've had doing this research towards my PhD. First, I'd like to thank my committee. Dr. Andrew Vanderyard is my major professor, as well as Dr. Brian Ladet and Dr. Martin Dovchek. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in my lab, as well as the other organizations that have assisted me, specifically Brookhaven National Laboratory and the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. At Brookhaven, Kathy Schrager and Tim Green have been extraordinarily helpful. Finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the USCA for funding my research through the McIntyre Stennis program. All right, so before we talk about ticks in the Pine Barrens, I think it's important to understand what the Pine Barrens are. I know that for a lot of us, this may be, fairly, we're Long Island, so the Pine Barrens are big, but just in case we have some marine folks, I want to just briefly talk about what the Pine Barrens are. So Pine Barrens are, importantly, a globally rare ecosystem. According to NatureServe, which is an environmental organization that collects a lot of spatial data and analyzes it for conservation, the Pine Barrens are globally imperiled. So what we have here in the Central Pine Barrens region, as well as up into Cape Cod, down to South Jersey, the Pinelands is globally imperiled, and it's a natural treasure. And this natural treasure, which occurs, from Jersey to Maine, give or take, is intrinsically predicated upon routine disturbance, specifically fire. And that fire really creates a gradient of community types in the Pine Barrens, ranging from fairly frequent, potentially intense and severe disturbance to more infrequent, less, maybe intense or severe. And so on one end of the spectrum, we have the dwarf pine plains out in the Hamptons, which recently burned. And we also have, on the other end, we have these coastal oak forests that, they burn pretty infrequently, but still fire is important, or else successional change will occur and we will lose those species. So if we're thinking Pine Barrens sort of in general, if I was to have to give a brief description of what the ecological community looks like, we have mostly pitch pine trees with scattered other tree oaks, an understory consisting of some places scrub oaks, a couple species of those, and then an understory of a lot of Ericaceae shrubs, blueberry, huckleberry, and then a diverse array of herbaceous species, graminoids and forbs. And just to get a sense of what the disturbance history looks like and how that can change things here. This is a great diagram. I included in almost everything I talk about with the Pine Barrens, published by Jordan et al. In 2003. And they really looked at the spatial history of wildfire on Long Island. And from that, they really were able to tease together sort of what these fire return intervals, how routine the fires need to be in order to have the community structures that are needed for various biological conservation purposes. When you have, when you have disturbances too frequently or infrequently, there's those status changes, there's those transitions in the community composition. And, sometimes, and there's also sort of maintenance of the communities with some kinds of frequencies. So for example, a top killing fire every 5 to 20 years, which is similar to what we had recently down the Hampton area. Top killing fire 5 to 20 years is good to maintain the dwarf pine plains. And so what we saw is probably going to bring back the dwarf pine plains again. Yeah. And so now that we sort of understand the pine barrens and their intrinsic importance, we can sort of take the other aspect of this talk, which is the thing everyone loves, tick-borne disease in ticks. So we have, I would say, 3 common medicinally important tick species here on Long Island. We have the Lone Star tick, the black-legged tick, otherwise known as the deer tick. There was some controversy earlier in the 90s, early 2000s about are deer ticks and black-legged ticks different species. Some people do think that deer ticks and black-legged ticks are different. I am of the camp that they are the same species, and so I'll be referring to them as black-legged ticks. There's also dog ticks, and these can carry a wide array of illnesses and diseases or disease-causing microorganisms. So, for example, the Lone Star tick, which is the most important or most common and aggressive tick species here on Long Island, can carry ehrlichiosis, a wide range of diseases caused by various Ehrlichia bacteria. The black-legged tick can carry, things like anaplasmosis, babiosis, Lyme disease, palatal encephalitis, and dog ticks can carry the pathogens that cause Rocky Mountains fever and tularemia. And so these are, increasingly common diseases. They are not only a source of great morbidity and mortality, but they have a great financial toll on our economic system. And so it is, thus, super duper important to address this public health threat. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you all, folks on Long Island, the necessity to control ticks. I'm sure this is the most friendly audience I'll ever get. And so the most effective way of controlling tick-borne diseases is often thought about in sort of this integrated pest management approach. We do lots of different things, and together we sort of find a way to handle the issue. We attack it from all sides. And our attacks on tick-borne diseases can be best thought about, in my opinion, by conceptualizing sort of tick-borne disease and disease as an ecological process. And so this is a quick diagram I threw up as conceptualizing sort of the life's history of the life cycle of some ticks and diseases that they carry. And the key here is that any one of these portions of the life cycle, if you break it, you could theoretically impede transmission. And so the more ways we try to break the life cycle, the more we can sort of put a barrier against disease. And so in brief, the tick life cycle, they start with eggs. Those eggs will hatch into larvae. And important to note here that most larvae do not contain pathogenic microorganisms. So most larvae don't have bacteria or viruses in them that will cause diseases. That's not a hard and fast rule. There are certainly, there are certainly some cases where that can be not the case, but in general, larvae are not ticks don't really do much transovarial transmission of pathogens. So mama tick doesn't really give many disease-carrying pathogens to baby tick. Again, not always the case. So always do your due diligence. But in most cases, larvae pick up their pathogens after their first blood meal, which is often on a small rodent. Which is often a small rodents like a mouse or other small animals. I'm a botanist. When the small animals change into nymphs, they retain the pathogenic microorganism in them. And after the second blood meal, which can be on a deer, at least I think that's a deer, or a human, they can get the pathogenic microorganism as well. And then, they will change into an adult, have a third blood meal, and that they're female, lay eggs. But on that adult blood meal, they can also transmit that disease to humans. And so we have, so with those nympho adult tick bites can, readily transmit pathogens to humans. And we can now, so now that we understand the life cycle, let's sort of think about how we can sort of, where can we break this cycle? So one of the first things is if it's a bacterial disease or something else, we can treat it with antibiotics. That is attacking the source of the disease. When it is in the human system. So it's attacking the disease when we're here. Not all tick-borne diseases can be readily treated with medications. Lyme disease can be a chronic problem. Viral diseases, antibiotics won't work on them. And so that is only, that is not the best solution, the only solution. Other potential solutions include, vaccines maybe at some points. Yeah, I don't know. That's above my, that's above me, the whole vaccination process. But, it's a potential way to put another barrier against tick-borne diseases. We can wear personal protective equipment, pants, long sleeves, short sleeves, provide a barrier to tick bites. You stop the bite, you stop the transmission risk. And we can also sort of do some kind of host management. Not saying, call all the deer, don't call all the small animals, but, some populations are out of control and managing that can maybe bring down risk. But so those are some methods we can do, but those methods of understanding the disease ecology life cycle and mediating tick-borne disease kind of ignore a huge component of the disease ecology life cycle, the tick life cycle, and that's the natural environment where the ticks live. It's the leaves and the forest floor and the grasslands where ticks spend a lot of their time if they're not having a snack. And so that begs the question, well, what can we do there to potentially address tick-borne diseases in tick populations? And as a fire ecologist, my natural inclination is to think, well, how does fire affect tick populations? What does fire do to ticks? So we could, after a fire, so the top over here represents an area where there's a fire, frequent fire. So there's direct mortality from a fire. Unsurprisingly, ticks and extremely hot flames don't necessarily go together very well. So there is often high mortality after a fire directly, but ticks come back. And the way they come back is because, there's constant movement of deer and other hosts into the post-burn area, and, they have ticks on them. So if a deer comes into an area with a pregnant female tick and she lays her eggs in a post-burn area, those eggs will hatch. However, if those hatch in an area that has burned frequently, there's a pretty good likelihood that those forest floors, that tick habitat is more inhospitable to tick survival because there's less leaf litter. Leaf litter and duff are buffers against desiccation. Ticks are very, very sensitive to desiccation-related mortality. When it gets hot and dry, ticks die. They dry out and there's mortality. So these post-fire environments, they can really, lots of sunlight, there's lots of wind, there's not much leaf litter where they can, hunker down and, watch TV while the bad weather exists. And so you can see some sustained mortality following fires, theoretically. The inverse to this is we don't have fire. And in the absence of fire, forests that have been adapted to periodic disturbances, like fire or other things, those undergo a process called mesification. And in mesification, you have a community compositional shift from fire-tolerant, disturbance-dependent, shade-intolerant species, like your oaks, your pines, as well as the herbaceous species that thrive in those open sunny conditions. And in the absence of fire, more moisture tolerant species establish themselves. So sort of the villain of most pyrophytic stories is red maple, because that's sort of the biggest, if you think of this, the face of mesification or the branch of mesification, it's red maple. And it establishes itself, and it's the way its growth form, its leaf litter, the way it collects rainwater, increases the moisture in the system, which further precludes fire, sort of pushes the cycle on and on and on. So it's like a positive feedback loop. And that positive feedback loop creates conditions that are just perfect for tick survival. It's like building another Dunkin' Donuts in Boston. That's where I'm from. It's perfect. Like that's where people want to go. And so mesification could be increasing tick-borne disease. Mesification could be increasing tick populations, which could thereby be increasing tick-borne disease risk. So what do we know about existing tick-borne disease? Tick-borne research. So we have there's apparently contradictory results right now. Results in tick-borne disease, fire and tick research. So some studies suggest that fire can actually promote tick populations. Others show that fire kind of has a negligible impact on tick populations. Others have shown that fire actually can impede tick populations. And so, it's hard to make any sense out of that. But when you sort of really look at each of these studies, you kind of get a glimpse of the fact that each of these was done with fire patterns that differed, in time and spatially and in terms of intensity, severity. With fire regimes that sort of conform to more frequent, spatially extensive fires tend to have more tick populations impede. Others show less, conformity with those prior patterns, often historical. And from there, you can sort of get the sense of, we burn more, we burn according to historical frequencies. Maybe we're seeing some more tick declines, and that could lead to maybe disease decreases. I would say the best example of this, in my mind, is work that Professor Elizabeth Gleim has done down in the southeastern United States. She saw an over 99% decline in total tick abundance from burned areas versus unburned areas. I don't have to run an ANOVA or a t-test or other statistics that I'm not good at because I'm a botanist to tell you that a difference between 44,000 and like 44 is significant. And later work from her showed that this translates to a chance of encountering a tick that has a disease decreasing by 95%, or a pathogen by 95%. So it doesn't change the pathogens the tick carries, but it changes your risk of encountering one if you're out in the woods. But the Northeast is a gap in this. Most of these studies have not taken place in the Northeast. So myself and my collaborators have been looking to adjust, look at how ticks and fire interact in a Northeastern system predicated on fire with a bad tick problem. And so naturally, Long Island. And so before we get to that, the big takeaway here is, fire could potentially be a way to impede, have no change or promote tick populations. We really want to stop or have them go. It depends on the fire regime. So think of like fire as like a stoplight and ticks as cars, and you can stop them with the correct fire. So on to the research here. So we are sampling ticks, in two Pine Barren areas. One coastal at Brookhaven National Laboratory. The other is an inland isolate of Pine Barrens at Albany Pine Bush Preserve. They're not perfect comparisons, but it's also not like apples to oranges. It's like Granny Smith apples to Macintosh apples. They're pretty similar. We're collecting ticks by dragging cloth fabric in the woods. It's probably the most high-tech research going on at Brookhaven, in my opinion. And we're sampling across three different treatment areas that have frequent fire. And so I defined frequent fire as burning once in the past 15 years, and then at least once more in the past 15 before that, which is not very frequent. But we don't have much burn history on Long Island of repeated fire because there's been a fire suppression push for so long. Infrequent once in the past 15 years, control hasn't really burned at all. Ticks are collected and identified. We're recording meteorological conditions, retaining them for future pathogen testing, and we're assessing some community variables. So this sort of shows you the spatial layout of my plots across Brookhaven National Laboratory and in the Pine Bush in Albany. And this sort of gives you a sense of the burn frequency and history. And so one thing I want to just throw out here right now is that the areas that have burned frequently are red, infrequently are yellow, and control or no fire is green. And we have at Brookhaven, there's some places that have burned 3 times in the past, since 2005, 2012, which is pretty good. But at Albany, we have places that burn, 5, 6 times going back to 99, which is, that's a lot of fire. And so there are differences in burn history here. And when I show you the next graph and you're like, why am I up here? Just, you'll see. And so when we look at the adult and nymph ticks collected by TrueBeta BNL, we don't really see much. So control is green, frequent is red, infrequent is yellow. So the treatments are on the x-axis, and the ticks per sample period are in the y. And those bars on the top represent 95% confident intervals. So I am 95% confident that the mean number of ticks falls within that range. And I am 95% confident that there is no difference between control, frequent and infrequent ticks in my sample sites as of now. That's not the take home though. We should sort of modify that when we look at what the results were for tick dragging at Albany. In Albany, I've seen dramatic super decreases in tick abundance versus the frequent versus and infrequent versus control. I need to caveat this a little bit because the one big difference here is that the dominant tick species up in Albany is the black-legged tick. Well, in Long Island, you're unfortunate enough to have the Lone Star tick. And Lone Star ticks are super duper resilient. And so they're better at surviving. But even with that caveat, I am 95% confident that there is a pretty substantial difference caused by fire and tick survival. And so I want to have the rest of the conversation in the context of the burn history of Albany and what that, what that can inform us about what we should be doing with the pine barrens here on Long Island. So further looking into Brookhaven National Laboratory, looking at the life stage of adults and nymphs. Again, nymphs, they're pretty similar. Same with adults. Maybe you can see some idea where infrequent fire causes less ticks than the others. Maybe there's less ticks and controls versus nymphal ticks and controls versus frequent. But it's still pretty close, and more data is needed. And so I'll be going back out to Brookhaven to collect more ticks this summer. Now let's sort of look at how those tick populations relate to some environmental factors that we collected. So first, we're looking at canopy cover and ticks per sample. And there really is not much of a correlation between canopy cover, which is on the X, and ticks per sample, which is on the Y. Pretty uniform. The coefficient of variation is 0.01, which means that that trend explains not much of the variance at all. Now, if we look at leaf litter versus ticks per sample, we're getting into more of a potential explanatory thing, not good by any stretch of the imagination, but we can see that where there's less leaf litter, there's less ticks, and that trend is the variance of that trend is explained about 8% through that relationship. So leaf litter and ticks, you can sort of see that less leaf litter maybe correlates with less ticks. A similar thing can be seen when you look at fire history. Oh, don't look at that one yet. Actually look at that one yet. So when you look at the years since the most recent fire and ticks that are found, you also see the semblance of a trend where the closer the fire was, the less ticks that you're going to see. But again, that's not a very high R squared, not a very compelling coefficient of variation. But when I looked at this, one thing I saw was sure looks like that there's a awfully straight line between the red dots, which is the frequent fire. And I was like, that looks like it could be pretty substantial. And so when I went ahead and, plotted there, we get a R squared of 0.62, which means that the years, the more frequent fires, the more recent the frequent fire in areas that are burned frequently have markedly less ticks than those that have had longer periods between fire. And so my take home from seeing this right here is if we have frequent fire events and those frequent fire events are maintained, the more recent they are, there may be a decline in tick populations that we see. And one of the reasons why we could see this trend is because, after a fire, ticks can increase based on, deer presence, deer factors. But the more we have a fire consuming that leaf litter, the bigger chance that we have that, or there's less likely for there to be more refugia for those ticks to hide in the presence of fire. And so finally, just want to sort of hone in how fire can maybe be considered a benefit for these systems. So you have more fire, you can decrease tick populations, and you can promote various environmental benefits that are desired by these systems. So Albany, the condor blue butterfly is one of the reasons why they burn. Federally endangered species. Here on Long Island, burning can maybe drive down those tick populations and also maintain the pine barrens, which need fire. And that gets us to this idea of One Health, which is an interdisciplinary way to look at how we can improve animal, human, plant, and environmental health. And I'm a proponent that fire can be a way that we can treat this, treat our health at these levels. With that, I'd love to take any questions. Sorry, I went over.
Is the natural enemy of ticks other than fire?
So hot and dry conditions, they're really sensitive to desiccation-related mortality. In my opinion, there's no animal species that will eat ticks to an extent that they're medicinally controlled.
I have two questions. One is, what I learned here is that it's sort of obvious that if you think about it, fire is necessary to maintain the pine barrens.
Absolutely.
Some state or other. Does the county understand? And the reason I ask that is a week ago, I was at breakfast at which Ed Romaine, county executive, was speaker, and he was priding himself on he was praising all the firefighters who came out and put the fire out in just 2 days instead of 10 days as the previous mega fire was.
Sure, yeah.
So the question is, do they understand that fires should be allowed to burn under certain circumstances?
Yeah. So first, fire can be very dangerous in the wrong circumstances. You have a fire moving towards people's homes or people, you have to put the fire out. I'm a firefighter with the federal government, per diem. So you have to put some fires out. Regarding whether the county knows, I'm not too dialed in with the political process. I do ecological research. I unfortunately don't have a good answer for that, but it's certainly worth you bringing up to your officials, asking about, their understanding of the fire.
Okay. Second question was, you showed a chart early on in the talk that showed incidents of various diseases over a period of time that ended 10 years ago. But in the time range you showed, there's a significant decrease in Lyme disease by about a factor of 5.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know what the cause of that is?
So off the top of my head, no, to be honest, but my biggest guess, just with what I know about tick dynamics here in Long Island, and Tim, maybe correct me if you have any ideas, but I would say it may have to do with the fact that Lone Star tick is becoming more and more common. So maybe they are sort of usurping the niche of black-legged ticks, which are the ones that carry the Borrelia. We could also be getting better at recognizing tick-borne disease threat and treating it, but I don't have a firm answer for why that might be.
If you recognize it and start treating it, you find greater incidence on other incidents.
So more
Prevention.
Yes.
Thank you.
One last one.
This one. Okay, the one that's below. This should be a really good question. It's my understanding that the female tick needs a blood meal in order to produce eggs. Does that mean that when we're out in the field, it's the female who really does? The males don't care about getting blood meal?
So I've heard, so I have personally had male adult ticks bite me. So my personal experience, male adult ticks will bite you.
Hi, this is really quick question. Have you heard of Felicia Kiesling's work? She was studying the amount of ticks and reducing ticks. And she found that when she reduced the ticks, she didn't reduce the disease.
In terms of,
as a vector. So the way that she kind of went about it was making the environment healthier.
yes.
And I'm curious if you're looking into that.
Yeah, so certainly, it only takes one tick to cause a disease. And so you can't get rid of the threat, but you can certainly reduce the risk, such as by, making the environments more inhospitable for tick survival. It's impossible to, extirpate all ticks and make the risk, zero. But if we maybe incorporate fire management into this pattern of other kinds of solutions, like, wearing appropriate clothing, medicine, vaccines, other stuff, maybe we can get a handle of it. And a big part of that is sort of addressing the host component of what these ticks, where they pick up that blood meal. You increase maybe the diversity of potential hosts. You can maybe decrease the likelihood of having a blood meal that's on a species that is a reservoir for those diseases. And so I've looked at a lot of her work, and it's great.
Thanks.
I'll be here to speak if anyone has any other questions. Sorry for going long.